My name is Chris Curtis. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Broadcast, and as Jake said, I'm here to chair this session on how to use data to bring sports broadcast to life. My first job is to introduce the speakers and to play some clips, so let's crack on. Immediately on my left is Mark Hyde. Mark's an award-winning creative director with a career spanning more than 25 years in sports. He's been head of design at BT Sport for the last 4 years, and he leads their creative team. Let's take a look at some of his team's work. Very good. Short and sweet. That's how we like it. Next up, moving around the panel, is Laurie Beaumont. Laurie is head of graphics at Moov, which is one of the UK's leading sports and events graphics companies, and it works with the likes of the BBC, ITV, IMG, and BT Sport. He specialises in how best to apply new technologies and in developing new solutions, and we'll now see a little clip of what Moov does. Very good. Not too many companies work on heavyweight boxing and Mock the Week, so some diversity of work there from Moov. And finally, last but not least, on the panel, Duncan Alexander is football's favourite geek, I've written here. I don't know if that's terribly unfair. He works as the VP of Data Editorial for Opta. He's written for almost every major publication you can think of. He's probably my favourite contributor to the Totally Football Show podcast. And he recently tweeted that Tim Cahill is responsible for 1% of all the headed goals in the Premier League in the 21st century. So if you're after some interesting dinner time conversation pieces, Duncan's your man after the session. Okay, what are we going to do? We're going to talk about how these guys integrate really interesting data and graphics into sports broadcasting. We're going to ask ourselves why they do it, what they're trying to achieve when they make use of data or introduce a graphic, and we're going to ask, once they've decided the why, how they actually go about achieving that. And that's the point I'm going to start really with you, Mark, if you can kick it off. When you know, you've worked in this area for a long time, when you're thinking about introducing a new graphic or introducing some new data point, what are the kind of things that you might be trying to achieve?
you're always looking at what the viewer experience, and ultimately you're looking for a engagement with that. You obviously want to look good at the same time, but there's a purpose for it, and that purpose has got to be editorially led. And if it isn't, you've got to ask the question why you're doing it. We will sit with production, or we will sit with digital, and we have a good relationship with Moov. So when we are, creating, developing, etc., it's not just the design team or the creative team. It's a team discussion. So if someone does feel that, that what is the point? We will discuss that, and we'll root out the problems and make sure there is a rhyme and reason for whatever we do.
Good. Laurie, there's a sense that we're talking about finding ways of maybe illuminating a new narrative during the course of a game, or helping a viewer understand, a complex piece of play, or, these are the kind of driving forces, right?
Yeah, of course. So the story is the key part here. Without having a story, you need to help the audience understand what's going on in front of them. And those stories could be evident right at the start, so you can build some really nice analysis on graphical pieces pre-match, for example, that really illustrate what's about to happen in that match or event. All those stories can become apparent at 1 minute's notice. So the key from our perspective is we've got to have all of those tools available to production, to our operators, so they have the confidence that they can come up with an idea, offer it, or they can have an idea requested to them to help tell that story. As I say, it can happen at a drop of the hat, and sometimes time is finite to get those stories out there at different parts of the broadcast. So it's really creating efficiencies that allow us to do that quickly.
Yeah,
is the key thing.
That's interesting. We'll return to that. And Duncan, from your perspective, can you give us a sense of how Opta supplies data to all types of different organisations? Broadcasters, one portion of that. How's the type of data that broadcasters have been requesting from you changed in over time in recent years?
Yeah, I mean, as Laurie says, the speed is often the key thing. It isn't necessarily data that's not available elsewhere. It's just what we're good at is researching it and pushing it out really quickly. So something might happen, Sadio Mane scores a hat-trick in less than 3 minutes. We can quickly push out within 10, 15 seconds the fastest hat-tricks. And it's kind of owning that conversation, really. And it makes pundits look more knowledgeable. It makes fans look more knowledgeable to their friends. We see with social media, that's been a massive thing for us. We can see what fans like. Stuff we used to think that was quite cool, they don't really like, and vice versa. So.
And has that changed from broadcast? Are broadcasters asking you for different stuff these days, or is it the case that it's about speed and efficiency? Is that driving?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back sort of 10, 15 years, one of the first applications of Opta data in broadcast was the player cam on Sky, which was quite good for its time, but people didn't really want to watch a player for 90 minutes. So the data was kind of lost. And I think what TV is very good at now is kind of knowing how to present stuff a lot better. And if you watch a broadcast now, you'll see data kind of integrated a lot better. Things will pop up. Someone takes a penalty, you'll see where the player's last 5 penalties went. When that first was built, broadcasters worried that the commentators would have to describe what was going on. This player missed some penalties, but you don't, because it's just there, and fans kind of what it is.
Figure it out themselves. Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to stay with you, Duncan, and then I'm going to come back to you guys, Mark and Laurie. Duncan, did your heart soar when Match of the Day introduced XG for the first time? Is that a Rubicon moment for the use of data on TV sport?
Yeah. Well, not when I looked at TweetDeck at people talking about it after it had gone out, but essentially XG is expected goals, which is a newer analytical model. It's been around sort of 5 years. Clubs have been using it for 5 years. We pushed it out to the media last summer, and it's good in the sense it kind of shows how well regarded we are, in the sense that Match of the Day were happy to put it straight on their broadcast, and it goes up every week as part of the match stats at the end of the game. And it does show a kind of a greater appreciation of data, but also the fact that fans want a way of talking about games that isn't just we were good, you were bad. They want a bit more granular information.
Yeah. Mark, I wonder from your perspective, is this something that you're noticing from viewer feedback and from the BT Sport broadcast, that this stuff is becoming increasingly mainstream and actually viewer expectation has changed?
That's the word. There's an expectation there now. It's just part of the arsenal of graphics that you put on a live feed. Opta particularly great with football, etc. And it's where do you go with it? You know, we pop up throughout the game, 3 or 4 times half time, full time. You know, it's pushing it. It's where you know, how much do you want to push? Well, we don't do XG at the moment, but do we? You know, it's where you go. I've seen your menus of if you want to buy something of Opta, it's this long, and you just taste it. You buy what you need. So it's going back. It's having those chats with production, see what they want to do with it,
and chats with talent as well, I guess, because I mean, there are some football pundits, for example, out there who might be more traditional in their thinking. Might see some of this as sort of newfangled, and you know, what can a data scientist tell me about taking a penalty? Is it the job of a broadcaster to try and sort of present that data to them, show them what, encourage them to use it?
It is. I mean, you know, you've got things like touchscreens, etc. that we're moving into the Premier League now as well. Some talent don't want to use it. You know, some are quite happy sitting behind a desk, but others, you know, they're pushing for it. They want it. So, you know, let's bring it on. You know, people like Rio and Jermaine Jenas, etc. You know, it's what they want.
A younger generation, perhaps.
A younger generation, you know, maybe they're just used to that sort of world.
I think the key with presenter-led analysis is you only really have one shot initially to win them over with it. If it fails or goes wrong and it makes them look foolish on the telly, then that's a big problem, and that means that won't be used again for the foreseeable future until there's confidence there. So I think from our perspective, we have a responsibility that we have an obligation to ensure that the talent are well looked after.
Great. But also those guys want to be more than just a talking head. You know, they don't want me to put graphics up. They want to be telling it. They want to be the pushers of that information. Yeah,
that's interesting. Can we talk a bit about some examples where, so Moov is a big supplier to BT Sport of graphics and visualization of the kind of data that are coming from the likes of Opta. What do you guys do at the moment that you're, you know, working together that you're particularly proud of, that you think is, you know, we're doing some really decent cutting edge sort of stuff here? What are the things that you're working on that you think we're quite excited about the potential for this?
Yeah, Moov are a strategic partner, have been for 5 years, 6 years?
Since the start, I think.
Since the start. We've just moved into a new season of Champions League with a new rebrand, which meant we were looking at what we can do differently. Again, you know, a group of people talking about it. And it was really what works well at the moment, do we need to change it, etc. And one of the key things is when we come on air, we have the floor you're now sitting on is our canvas, if you like, for AR. And being able to put a map of Europe on that floor and be able to track over that in AR, badges popping out of it, to intro the show, it's fantastic. We developed that, the design team, that then goes through to Laurie's AR section, and the magic commences. But yeah, it's rather than just, you know, coming on air with a list of who's playing that night, to be able to sort of have a map there, track over it, badges popping out. That's the story of the night. At the end of it, you can come back to that with the scores, etc. You know, so you can top and tail that story quite nicely.
It's also an example of something that you can prepare in advance, right? That's not. There's no time pressure. You were talking about Laurie on that. You know where the games are. You can make that. You can finesse that.
You do. You know where the games are. You know. At halftime, you know you're going to need scores. At full time, you're going to need scores. There are certain things we have to consider when we get a design from Mark. It may be there's the kind of aesthetic look of it that we have to implement, but then it's really working out those use cases that production are going to use that we have to make sure are accounted for. How they're going to, you know, how they want the fixtures to behave. All 8 goes down to 1, goes down to 4. All those changes, and then an expansion of a fixture. Do we show a table? Do we show a video box at that point? Do we show match stats at that point? How do we get from A to B to C, or A to C, or A to D? It's all of those things that we then have to look at behind the scenes mechanically and how that can be best applied.
And how about some things where there is some time pressure, where, you know, I know there isn't with commercial breaks, there's not a huge amount of time for half-time analysis, but, you know, you've got a short section there.
Yeah.
You've just watched the first half. We need to quickly jump in with some analysis. There's stuff that you're doing in that space where you're turning things around quickly. That's kind of getting quite sophisticated.
Yeah, so it depends on broadcaster to broadcaster and their commercial obligations at those times. It often comes to the case that halftime analysis can only fit in a 3 to 4 minute section, and you may only have 1 or 2 opportunities of doing analysis in that time, and it may not even be a graphical piece. It may just be we're watching some video here. It could be a Piero analysis tool, which is a very, very strong tool still. But the request for a graphic is only as quick as the decision. So obviously we can preempt quite a lot of things, whether it be the map and scores and all those things. That's a given, that's a staple. But all of a sudden, Raheem Sterling scored in 2 minutes injury time up before half time. Quick, we need to have some stats on him for the game, so that involves a picture, which we have on file, but do we want an updated one? Is there time to do that? What are the stats that are going in there that best illustrate him? It's a whole customizable template, and the workflow is set up in a way that allows us to react quickly, but it's just making sure that we can jump on that as soon as we can, and I think we do very well at that.
And I'm interested in the kind of creative process in terms of whether that's the production team leading that, whether that's the sort of design team, the graphics supplier, whether some of that might come from the raw data supplier in terms of people thinking about what are the ideas that we're actually looking to illustrate. I guess ideas can come anywhere along that sort of food chain.
There's many parts to it. So as Jamie mentioned earlier, it's a big collaboration here, and that's a really good way of fostering creativity. We get the data feeds in from Opta, and we will look at those and we'll say, oh, there's something here that we think we could pick up, because we get the base level stats, but then it's how you then interpret those and how you drill down into those with certain queries to generate extra ones. So we would go to production to have those conversations. Well, I would have those conversations with Mark and vice versa. But it may be the case that a producer will come to us on a Monday before a Tuesday and say, oh, I'm thinking about doing this tomorrow, can you help me out? And we was like, yeah, we can, or no, we can't, but we could do it this way, that sort of thing. So it's an open dialogue all the time, which is what we are quite proud of doing. We try to make ourselves open in that way and as helpful as possible.
Okay, and to what extent, if I was playing devil's advocate, I might say that some of the stuff that you guys do is about utility and really trying to unpack a story or help me as a viewer understand something that I might not have previously understood. And some of it is kind of just making things look nice, that there's an element of, if I see an AR representation of a 4-4-2 football formation, it doesn't really tell me much more than if I'd looked at a traditional 2D representation of that. But there's an element of both those things, right? Like something that's visually impressive, but also, and perhaps more importantly, unpacking storytelling.
So on our Champions League coverage, for example, we use both tools. We have the traditional on-screen graphic, which is usually done over the reporter at the ground, who will give you the first hit of team news. And then we'll come back into the studio and Gary will introduce Rio and whoever the other guests are that night, and they'll then drill down into the AR graphic as more of an analysis of that formation. And at that point, we can then start doing things like depressing rows, highlighting certain players, even moving them around to show a different formation if they have a different opinion on the official data lineup, essentially.
Yeah, I think this is where data can then play another role in the sense of, you might say, look, they're playing 4-4-2, and then data can tell you that the last time 4-4-2 was the most common formation in the Premier League was like 2006-07. The guests are probably players that were playing at that time. You can say to them, why do you think this has fallen out of fashion? And it basically then just drives conversation. And I think that's a really good way of kind of extending and sort of stretching the guests as well.
And a lot of this stuff, if I think about visual representations of data, it's easy to think of pie charts and bar graphs and slightly dry kind of stuff. Yeah. You guys are obviously trying to be more innovative than that. What are the guiding principles that you use when you're thinking about how to visually represent some of this data that's coming through?
We got to remember it's telly for a start. It's not a newspaper. I'm not going to sit there for 20 minutes and absorb, a fantastic-looking graphic. The graphics do look fantastic, obviously, but they need to be digestible.
Quickly,
bite-sized chunks. I mean, a director's going to sit on a graphic for, well, depending on what it is, but 3 or 4 seconds max. Okay, if it's a league table, you're going to get a little longer, but ultimately, most graphics are going to come and go very quickly. In fact, I think the league table is probably the only one I might actually pause and spend a bit more time on myself at home. But But yeah, it's taking the key information, the key data, and making sure that's what people see. If they've got to read it, you know, they've got to take it in instantly. You've got to read it and take.
There's an element you were talking about, the penalty scored, penalty missed graphic that pops up. As a viewer, you can assimilate that really, really quickly, and I don't need to unpack it. I can just see, as he scored, as he missed, did he shoot top left, did he shoot top right? It's that kind of thing, right? Where that's about speed and simplicity, or digestibility, if that's a word. It is now.
Yeah. No, it is. And you know, that example, there's no text on there where it might say Raheem Sterling penalties or something. But other than that, you've got a goal with like 5 dots of footballs on it. So again, it's boom, you know it straight away. There's no working out what we're trying to say there. It's, straight away.
We have had some not so best applications, I think. So one of the early examples of AR statistical comparisons that we did was like an overlay that you'd see on a computer game like Football Manager. It was like a pentagraph, and you draw the points and it would cover an area, and we kind of pushed that forward. And like, that's a youthful thing, you know, kids that play that game will understand that as a concept.
Like a radar, do you mean?
Like a radar, yeah. So basically like a spider's web on a with values, but it didn't really work on television.
I mean, as someone who looks at a lot of graphics and numbers, I don't get those.
Yeah.
And similarly, I think heat maps, there was a period when everyone was using heat maps all the time, thinking that, you know, they gave some great insight, and most of the time they don't. Occasionally they do. I mean, I remember Roberto Soldado away at Manchester City for Tottenham. Nearly all of his touches were kickoffs because they lost 6-0. So that was quite good.
All right, Duncan.
Sorry, apologies. But no, that was quite interesting because basically just a big bit of heat in the middle of the centre circle. So that's good. But yeah, you can overuse stuff. It's always about the application of stuff at the right time.
Poor old Soldado. Can we talk about this idea of getting closer to the action? One of the things that's come about in recent times is use of graphics, use of data, kind of doing it pitch side, or you know, in the kind of field of play. Mark, is that something that, you know, you can give a different feel to it rather than doing something in a studio?
Well, we currently don't do it. We don't put AR on the road at the moment. We tend to start pitch side. Again, you're getting close to the action, you know, and then we'll go up to studio probably for half time and full time. What we want to do, what are you trying to achieve, you know, before the game? Most of the when we're superimposing over the pitch, it will be from a Piero. So that is available, but it's not. We're not having a presenter there with a big AR graphic next to them at all. It will be analysis led, and we'll be cutting to that. And there'll be a pre-built sequence.
One of the things that I think is quite interesting, if I'm allowed here at BT Sport to utter the word Sky, is their cricket coverage, for example. They're doing this sort of Sky Kart thing where they grab a player as they're coming. So Joe Root's just scored 100, and he had lots of success with a cover drive shot. And they bring him off the field of play, and they show him 3 different cover drives that he played, and they actually get quite technical and that kind of thing. That's quite an interesting thing for sports coverage in terms of immediacy, technical sort of unpacking. Is that something that you're interested in kind of pursuing?
It is. Football's not a good example of that because you don't really get to the players that easily. They're not going to give you that much time. Cricket's fantastic. For MotoGP, you may or may not have seen that. We go on the road, and there is a touchscreen there for analysis, etc., where we pull in the riders, and that's very successful. So similar formula, and successful.
Great. Okay. One of the things that I wondered a little bit about, and I genuinely don't know the answer to this question, is when I was talking to my colleague Jake about this, we were talking about the idea of changing viewer expectations and whether the FIFA generation has a different expectation of what you guys as sports broadcasters might be able to show me as a viewer in terms of player perspectives and that kind of thing. I think there's some work going on around that sort of space. Is there do people have higher expectations now, younger fans in particular, do you think?
I think so, and I think audiences are becoming much more aware of the technology that is in broadcast, because there's a big bridge between the gaming industry, which is very accessible to people, and how that's now being applied within broadcast. You may have all seen the stuff on the Weather Channel recently, all of their big, high glossy, virtual wildfire animations to illustrate a point, and that's gone a bit viral, and people are aware of this. So people are becoming even more critical of it as well, which is important for us because it means that we have a kind of a level that we must aim for. From a technological point of view, all of the graphics vendors that make hardware that we're talking to are trying to adopt this Unreal Engine with good success, and it's something that is going to be a big thing in the next 18 months for sure. As we've seen in earlier today with some of the stuff that Eurosport were coming up with at the Winter Olympics, you have the ability to create a high quality, high gloss environment which is photoreal. So
Yeah.
and that creates a whole myriad of opportunity there, and to really disrupt how traditional broadcast presentation is done. So
That could come through in the next 2 or 3 years, you think? That could
I
move
think
into the
there's
mainstream?
from my personal point of view is I think there's a big push in that now, and a lot of people are starting to adopt it.
I think from a data perspective, what we're seeing is a lot of younger fans now don't follow teams as much as they follow players. You saw how many people moved from Real Madrid's Instagram across to Juventus when Ronaldo moved clubs. So I think when you're thinking about designing graphics and focusing on stuff post-match, pre-match, focusing on key players more than teams might be a good way to sort of engage the younger audience.
The cult of the player is kind of a real thing, particularly for the younger fan. Can we talk a little bit about second screen and sort of companion apps and that kind of thing? I can't quite decide on that, whether it felt like it was coming, and then perhaps there was a slight move away from it. What's your take, Mark, on the kind of data that you can serve up, the kind of graphics you can serve up to someone away from the main screen?
Well, what we do in Champions League at the moment is we've got the Diva app, which is Delta Tray, which is fantastic. We especially on Champions League, like when you've got 8 games, you can watch any of those. You can rewind, pause, go back, watch. If you've come in late, you've got the goals, any incidents, etc. I mean, that's fantastic. Obviously, the game is on, and I think the viewing figures are going up on those. But the watching on an app now, I think it was 37% up year on year, live games. So there's obviously an appetite for it.
Yeah.
And whether that's people watching it as well as TV as well, or just on the probably just on the Moov, or, on mobile. But it's popular. It's being used, and it's here to stay.
Okay, good. One thing that I wanted to ask you about is the balancing act between pushing new technology and getting it right and making it really effective. So one of the things that sort of went viral a little while ago was what a layman like me might call an Eden Hazard hologram interview.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't a hologram, obviously, but he was being interviewed by pundits in his studio. I guess it was sort of green screened in some way, but he was sat there virtually, sat there and being interviewed. And it was kind of both quite impressive and a bit weird at the same time.
Yeah.
So how do you guys work out the basis of when to push something hard and when to actually hold on until you're really totally convinced about its value?
I think the problem with that clip was it just wasn't executed very well. It was technically it was a shambles. He was lit differently.
It looked weird.
I don't think he was keyed particularly well. But if it had been done well, we'd probably have a completely different story or conversation about it. It's the fact that it was bad is that was almost the story, wasn't it? What do I feel about it? Again, is that a gimmick, trying to sort of virtual someone next to you on a sofa or next to you on a pitch? At the moment, I'm jury's out on that one.
Jury's out.
Yeah.
Laurie?
It's really, do you actually gain anything from doing that rather than, we've seen it on Match of the Day and Sky do the same way, put the headphones on the player and they have a two-way from the flash position at the ground. Is that, what are you losing if you're putting it in the studio? I think when it comes to technology, some of the best things to use are the things that have been around for 20 years. And, you know, you still see it on the NFL. They have the little yellow line that they just draw on, and does all they really need to do in that sense. All new high-tech developments are great and really interesting, but yeah, I think they have to be properly thought through and not just for a gimmick's sake. Because part of the ethos here is whenever we do AR, is like we're doing AR, but it has to have a use. It's not for AR's sake, essentially. So I think you really have to drill down and ask yourself, why are we doing it in this way?
It comes back to that question, why are you doing it?
Great. We have got a handful of questions on the Slido app, and we have got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to rattle through some of these. Before we do, my final question to each of you on the panel is, let's assume that some Man City-style investors swoop in and buy your business. They give you effectively an open checkbook, so you can either go out and buy the world's most expensive fullbacks, or you can invest in your traditional area. For each of you in turn, what if money was no object, what would you love to sort of try and pump more resource into that you think might be exciting and might deliver results in the future?
4K and HDR are currently big on the agenda. I think the public needs to get on board with that. So if you could give everyone a 4K telly and HDR ready box, that'd be good.
It sounds fantastic. I think I'm
getting.
Speak to me afterwards and we'll see if you can make that.
I quite like my department to be kitted out with HDR monitors as well. That'd help. So yeah.
Very good, Laurie. For you, what's exciting for Moov at the moment in terms of cutting edge stuff?
Well, to echo Mark's comments, HDR is a really big and impressive leap forward. It's one of those things where you see them side by side, SDR and HDR. It's really night and day, and that's the one thing that has impressed me the most over all of the other recent developments, such as 4K. I think HDR it surpasses that. It's one of those things. I think ultimately it'll immerse the audience that little bit more. So for me, it'll be that side of things, I think.
Very good. And Duncan, is there a new data pool that you'd love to capture, or what?
Personally, I'd like to own a couple of expensive fullbacks.
Yeah.
You could do garden or whatever. But I think from a data perspective, you can go broad and you can go deep. So in terms of breadth, it'd be quite good to go. And we often gets levelled, Opta thinks football started in 1992. Well, no, actually, a lot of data only exists from 1992. So to go back, and have the top assister from 1946 probably wouldn't be very useful very often, but it's there if you need it. But then in terms of depth, we would, combining data sets is the big sort of next thing, really. So, taking even like biometric data sets, if clubs would let you have those, if you can see players who were calmer under pressure, things like that. I think, basically just augmenting what we've already got with more depth.
Excellent. Okay, let's take some of the questions. Questions have been excellent through the day from you guys in the audience. So let's see what's on here. We'll rattle through a few. A couple have got some thumbs up. Is there any data that you think is great, but you so far haven't found a way of illustrating that works for the viewer? In a nutshell, is there a nut you haven't yet cracked? Is there data coming through that you guys haven't quite worked out what the best visualization of it is yet?
Well, the number of data streams available are incredibly vast, and it's the key for us is to find the right thing to display at the right time. Our goal is to not oversaturate the viewer with pointless statistics. It has to really be the key quality part there. The data sets that Opta provide us are vast. You see things like high intensity sprints over distances of 10, 25 meters and all that sort of thing, which does have its uses, but you've got to find that special case for it. So that kind of then goes back to the editorial part of it and the statisticians that we work with, and then discussions go around about how best to harness this.
Our policy is always just to have it there in case you need it. So the good example of this was for years and years we've collected goalkeeper passing, which rightly no one ever cared about. But then Pep Guardiola signs Claudio Bravo on the basis that his passing was a key attribute, and suddenly everyone wanted that data. And then you could bring out Joe Hart's passing data from his entire career. So it's kind of, as you said, don't overuse it. Use it when it's applicable.
Okay, very good. There's a question here. How has new stats data such as expected goals enhanced the coverage and the experience of watching a game? and what's the next data trend? Is there anything that's going to come along to be the new XG? Duncan, is there?
Well, quickly on XG, I think with concepts like that, you need stories that fit into how people understand the game. So the big one last season was David De Gea basically saved an additional 14 goals above the average based on expected goals. Now, anyone that watched De Gea would know he had a really, really good season, and he's kind of regressed back to normal this year. So that was good in the sense that it kind of was a good example people could use to see that expected goals kind of did make sense. In terms of what's next, I mean, we're doing a lot of work on playing styles at the moment. So
playing style.
Playing style.
Right.
So yeah, this
Teams.
is again coming from our work with clubs, but we're going to filter it through to the media. So it's going to be not just how a team plays, but how they react to certain situations. And I think again, this is something that really fits into how fans understand the game. So I think it's going to be relatively easy to sell it to fans and to broadcasters as a thing.
Okay, that's good. Any other views on that one? Should I move on?
Just ask, most clubs now use data, obviously, heavily. It was an advantage when there was only 2 or 3 clubs using it. Now, well, now probably every Premier League club uses it.
Yeah, I mean,
Are they sort of equaling each other out?
partly, but they'll use it in different ways. Some will use it more for recruitment, some will use it more for performance. So, and you can, as always with football, solve one problem and another one pops up. So it's always a bit of an arms race.
Would data have stopped Spurs signing Soldado?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, probably used a bit more. Question here about people hard of hearing or sight impaired viewers, whether there's any way that you can customize data or use it or graphics to enhance the experience for people with those kind of conditions. Is that something that you guys are able to engage with?
I think it was alluded to earlier about object-based delivery. I mean, it's a possibility of having different delivery streams in that sense, in a graphical sense that cater to either hard of hearing or colourblind individuals. It's tough in a linear sense because you kind of have to, if you're doing a 4K broadcast, which is all going down to HD as well for another channel. In an ideal world, you'd have a set of graphics for the UHD channel, which are smaller and less obtrusive on the screen, but because that would be down-res to HD, they can't be that small because then they'll just be too small. So it's things like that. And then obviously things like web delivery as well, how the graphics appear on there to avoid any other furniture from the host. So if it's on Facebook or Twitter, when they've got their little live bugs or their comments chats, how you go around that. So less so to do with the hard of hearing and the sight impairedness. It's more so how it goes on the platforms, really.
Okay, good. There was a question on here about different. We've talked almost exclusively about football today, but some sports are less sort of linear, and whether some sports lend themselves more to use of data, and what opportunities there are in other sports to kind of maybe super serve a little bit.
Yeah, so we do a lot of tennis coverage as well, and we do a stats collection on that whenever we do live tennis scoring. So with tennis, you have the opportunity quite regularly to insert stats at sit-downs or in breaks of play, and even just pop up certain point stats between serves. So there's an opportunity there that allows the kind of commentary team or an analyst to dip back into the studio at certain points to really highlight a particular issue. Football, obviously, that does happen in game, but it tends to be a lot quicker turnaround, and there may be little pop-ups, whereas in tennis you would be able to get a full framer away if needs be. So it's, you tend to have different requirements depending on the type of sport that you're doing and how you can augment the coverage, essentially.
Okay, good. That's covered most of the questions that we've got and covered the things that I wanted to ask. Just as a sort of final piece then, final sort of point, it feels like data in sports broadcasting is kind of here to stay. Duncan, it feels like one of the things you're saying is that you just want to measure and gather as much as possible, offer it up to these guys, and then it's about you guys being creative and selective about what you use and how you use it. Are those the guiding principles? Is that it was like that, it's going to continue working in that way?
I was just about to say something that I was just completely forgotten.
Well, it strikes me that there's a balance. All of this is about a balance, right?
Yeah.
Between live and having people in the moment and not distracting them, not oversaturating the screen was something that you said earlier. But it feels as though there is a shift towards more and more of this stuff, and that your expectation is changing.
Again.
And that going forward, we're likely to see more graphics, more visualization of data in a sophisticated way, but that to a certain extent the genie's out the bottle, and younger generation, different expectations. This is something that's here to stay, and it's probably going to evolve and develop.
It is here to stay, and I think it's become, as well, maybe not as important as your talent, but I think with the way innovation is now used by platforms and channels, it's become part of the brand identity. It's not just a bit of analysis. It is as big as the brand now, and how you present it and has a big impact on the perception of your channel.
Of BT Sport as a channel, potentially, as a broadcaster, above and beyond.
It's part of the brand. It's expected. If it wasn't there, I think there'd be eyebrows raised.
I think now as well, it's not just a linear service where this data can go. It's obviously social media outlets and digital outlets as well. So there's a whole raft of extra outlets for this data. We live in a big data society now. People just want more and more of it. And I think people are becoming more accustomed to it. It's at their fingertips. You can look anything up as quickly as you want, even if it's just to search some figures up on Wikipedia. You can do it in 10 seconds if you want to. I think it's got its place, and I think the industry is much better for it as well. And I think it will just grow and grow and grow, and the offerings will become much more comprehensive.
Very good. Duncan, last word. Any data on the use of data? Have you measured how much data you're supplying and plotted some graphs?
That's a bit Inception, isn't it? I think, just to go back to my earlier point, I think it's just getting those stories. It's, we saw Ronaldo in the World Cup. We saw the clip from ITV earlier of him scoring that free kick in the World Cup. Pretty much everyone knew that was his 45th free kick in a major tournament, and that was because we'd pushed that number out in the previous 3 tournaments, and it got a little bit of traction. But as each tournament went on and the figure got higher, it became more of a story and more of a thing. So when one finally went in, that was a big story, and that was a data story.
Very good. Time is up. I'd like you to join me in thanking the panel. Thanks, guys. Cheers.